Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first December public steering meeting of 2022. As a general reminder, these meetings are recorded and we posted on the internet sometime later. We abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which essentially boils down to please be excellent to each other. I'm going to drop a link in chat to the notes to please highlight your name, drop your name in there. Also, I just want to offer a welcome to Carlos as the newest steering member to join us. Thank you. It's definitely appreciated. Filling in for Paris, who has stepped down to focus on GB and other things. Yes, much love. With that, the only thing on the agenda for today is annual reports. And sort of kicking those off. Someone dropped a link regarding the tools update. Christoph, was that you? Or Tim? Okay.
It was me.
Yep.
As soon as it went by, a classic this weekend, it goes by, the life cycle stale being removed. It's that time of year.
Yep. One second. So the cat. One of the biggest issues that we've had with the annual reports previously has been like templating things out. Everyone's filling out stuff differently, and without subbing things out, a lot of things get missed. And it's also a big headache on us to put things together when we're trying to assemble the giant report. So we've had an open issue for some time regarding potentially automating much of the updates that will help both our leads and ourselves when we have to assemble that report. But even outside of, that report and everything, it is probably time to at least start paying the leads to have them, start thinking about things that they might want to put in there. We set a general reminder in the last chair and TL meeting, but I think it's time for us to reach out to our various SIGs as liaisons to just start like pinging them like, hey, just a reminder, start thinking about this. It's going to be coming up. And then as far as the tools go, something we have been talking about with our Contribix hat on is potentially so in Contribix we have some we're running a leadership cohort right now for new chairs and TLs, and potentially pulling some of them in to help with the task of improving the tooling. So hopefully by the time it comes to actually putting the things down, we'll have a bit more automation in place. I lost the tab with the notes. Are there any other, I know that was me just talking for a bit, but are there any other thoughts, comments on annual reports at this point?
Do we want to have Carlos just take on Paris's existing liaisons? Should we think about doing any reshuffles, or?
I think for consistency, it would make sense, especially because they're still due some handoff roles and access wise. So I would say I think it makes sense to keep it simple unless people want to reshuffle.
Carlos, have you taken a look at the, what SIGs Paris was previously a liaison for?
Yeah, but I need to go deeper a little bit more.
Okay.
I'm gonna do this week. But sounds good to me to continue on the same stuff.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments regarding annual reports?
Did we try to be drafting a timeline? So if we're picking the SIGs working groups, say, hey, start thinking about this, a natural first question is, oh, when's it going to be due by?
Ideally, should be able to get it done by, I'd say, KubeCon EU. The hard part is if we want to add in a buffer for us to work on the big collated report, because that takes a significant amount of time. At least it has previously. So maybe ideal timeline is 1 month before KubeCon EU. That's when things should be merged.
So that's mid-April, mid or early April, right?
That would be March 20th.
March, yeah.
March or yeah. March.
Oh, okay. I was assuming KubeCon is only.
Yeah, that also gives us an opportunity to present some of the content for KubeCon if needed.
That might be also something we can pitch to the various leads during their maintainer sessions, like, hey, this is something you'll be able to use during your talks itself. I'd say the one thing is that does put a tightish timeline on tooling improvements. So that is something we will want to sort of figure out fairly quickly.
Do we have the required features logged in? As in, I see Paris suggested for specific metrics. Are those the only things we want right now?
Let's see. So caps per sig, sub projects per sig. I would say are the big ones, because that is where a lot of the like copying and pasting and sorting stuff out I think happen.
I think for some of the things we already have tooling. We already have code at several places. We just need to glue them into the tooling right now.
Yeah. It's like the maintainers thing. We can do that for the unique reviewers approvers.
And list of caps we already have. The manifest is public. We just need to add the integration to the
generator.
Yeah, I'll have a look at that. Should be pretty easy.
Okay.
For the others, I like your idea of like sharding it out to the cohort shadows. So they can also be involved with something which is like far reaching.
Yeah,
so since you mentioned this,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Nabrun, like I'll be taking point on that one, and we can speak with the rest of the cohort and stuff about that. But yeah, that's one thing I definitely want to try and help push forward, because having the generator last year made a big difference, but there's still a bunch of gaps where it could do a whole heck of a lot better.
I think we should document those somewhere.
Yeah, part of that will be scoping out the work, and although that will, I think we can do some of that asynchronously between steering and Kinderbex, as well as the mentor cohort, to sort of figure out exactly what everything we want on there, and the musts and the nice to haves.
So the tooling apart, since we have a very strict timeline, can we, before everyone goes out on vacation, at least start out with the issues in K community for the reports and start pinging our LAS and SIGs and working groups? At least do the initial round of things before the vacation. and then come back from the vacation and then ask people like, hey, did you have a chance to talk about it? If not, please do in the first few meetings of the year.
Yeah, that works for me, and our generator can already do that. Or, sorry, Christoph, did the generator open the draft, or like do we add like the template first, or do we open the issue first?
The generator can do this, but the generator running the generator in 2022 for the 2023 reports, I'm not sure works. I'd have to double check the code. It's been about a year since I've looked at the code.
Okay, so again, I think with this one we check, and then we can come back and see if we can actually generate the issues and do all that other fun stuff right now. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, are there any other report? Let's see, do we get the same questions for the report? Right now, yes. It's mostly we want to stub out a lot of the things that was a lot of hand, like people having to go generate their list of caps, put stuff in there, and things like that. I don't think our questions are going to be changing too much from last year because we already pared them down significantly. Christoph?
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, should we? Is that something that we should look at? Like, which questions were useful? Is there anything else we want to add to the report? Anything like that?
We can start with looking at the retro, which I admittedly have not looked at recently.
Yeah,
but yeah, I would say yes, it's revisiting. So we steering collectively also want to take the AI, say by the end of the week, or this time next week, to at least look at the retro and review the questions to see if things are good. That way we can sort of give the heads up to our SIGs that, hey, reports are coming up. And then at least have sort of the idea, at least the questions we want to ask. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Any other report related things?
Just a quick question for the like newbie. Where I can find this retro report?
It should be the link is somewhere in the notes.
Okay.
I'll have to dig it up. Like I'll dig it up and
No
paste it
worries.
back in there.
I can find, no worries.
Okay. If you find it, if you can paste in the notes, it'll save the rest of us time doing the same. Okay. I guess with that, are there any other items that people would like to discuss today? For Ben, we were just talking about annual reports. Thank you, Nabrun, for adding the bookmark. Or no?
I have a question about something that we talked about, I think 6 months ago. Not sure if I don't think I will get an answer in that call, but it's something that came back to recently during SIG release. It's about basically the signature for binaries for macOS. So we talked about this in May, and there was like legal aspect related to this, and it came up back last week during release and SIG release meeting. So asking again if like there's an update about this, Do we need to do something?
So if I recall, the last thing was Paris was inquiring internally at Apple. I don't know if there's been any status updates since. I don't believe there's been any status updates since then.
Oh, okay. I will.
Yeah,
will try to
we'll check in
follow
on
up.
it. Yeah, we'll check in
Okay.
on it because we have an AI for it. We also need to, I would say, on the SIG release side, we'll plan to check in with Mohammed, who's been working on some of the SIG release K10 for stuff, because I believe he's set up a workflow for binary signing on the Knative side. So there may be some prior art to, and then you
Yeah,
may have
the
kind
I-
of
yeah.
worked through these battles already. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea is basically get an Apple developer account, and provide that to SIG release so we can leverage some open source tooling to do signature. But I would say the technical requirement, it's get an Apple account. And I think that's the one thing blocking to help SIG release and block binary signature on Apple on macOS. How we get that account is now we can I think last time we said something about not allow individual get the account. So I'm like, if Steering can request to CNCF to ask to Linux Foundation and talk to Apple about this, we can try to get that and unblock release engineering.
Yeah, so part of what I was the reason I mentioned the Knative stuff is they may have gone through exactly this kind of scenario, figuring out the individual versus. So I'd like to sync with Mohammed first, at least on the SIG release side. We can chase it on the CNCF side too, but there are questions around, you know, that the company account, group account, organization account, what have you, may be required for it to be a legal entity, and figuring out which part of who we are in the community is a reasonable legal entity to use. Maybe a question that we have to chase. Christoph.
I was just going to say, depending on how long they've done it, it might not have been a problem if they were getting like Google to do it, as opposed to doing it as a project. Considering it's a fairly recent thing for Knative to be under the CNCF umbrella. So it may have been prior to CNCF that they solved this problem. So asking good, they might not even have a solution to this under our current system though.
That is also something potentially to bring up with Knative if they are still signing everything as Google. Tim?
So I dropped a link in to the Apple Developer Program enrollment where it gives some information on individuals and organizations, and where Stephen had mentioned like we may have to be a legal entity. It gives some words around what that is, and to me, I mean, not a lawyer, not a Apple certified developer anymore. I think I used to have one of these, but plain English of what's on that page reads like something that could not apply to Kubernetes today and would have to come from the CNCF. So I think we need to go talk to the CNCF about that. And also it is part of what is in the CNCF's charter. This is going to be something new, but it starts to feel like what Apple might require from us here is that the CNCF runs a signing service for its project binaries if we're going to go that route. I think that would be a reasonable thing to have for the projects for macOS binaries, but this is like an area where we'd be needing to request CNCF stand up a professional service with some notable security constraints as well. The reason Apple has these requirements is so that random people aren't giving the impression of official binaries from other entities, so that there's a reasonable level of control that's required here. But this feels natural and good, and again, part of what CNCF's charter says, like their charter says that the foundation seeks to offer up a fully integrated and qualified build of each of the constituent pieces on a well-defined cadence across the reference architecture. This isn't something that CNCF is necessarily quite started in detail, I don't feel like, but this would be a natural maturation point for us is a leading large project to push on for them to start doing.
I would largely agree with that. The one caveat is I would, just before starting that conversation, I would check in with Paris and Mohammed on some of at least their experiences before we create the issue. Okay. Any other thoughts on the signing for macOS? Okay. There's one other thing that I want to mention that I honestly feel bad for forgetting about. But we had an issue created in the steering repo, a request from Minikube. What they would like to do is potentially look at like integrating opt-in telemetry for Minikube to get an idea on usage, but that opens up a whole can of worms. They don't necessarily want to be the stewards of that data or anything like that, but it needs at least review from steering, and I think at that point, potentially an engagement from the CNCF.
There is a Linux Foundation level privacy document requirement, and also one specifically around telemetry. I'll pull up some links for that.
Thanks, Tim. Ben?
Yeah, we had to go through something related to this for the registry because we kind of inherently collect like anything that we log as all the traffic is coming in. It is for anybody using the upstream distro, it sort of is a live endpoint that they're all pulling from. And we have past history with people analyzing this data. I wasn't involved at that point, but it might be worth following up with Kate's infra how the PII analysis was done for determining like which SIGs or which companies were driving the traffic, that sort of thing. I believe that was done with II co-op, and like they had some kind of agreement to access the data as CNCF contractors, but we've been through private telemetry under Kubernetes before by way of the registry stuff, and there's a link to the privacy policy which we serve. It just points you to the Linux Foundations, which has a bunch of requirements.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Arnaud?
I think the real issue here is where to store the data, because if they use a third party to store that data, then we need to check the privacy policy related to that. But collection is covered by Linux Foundation privacy policy. Now, where we keep that data is like a different conversation. I think this is the one thing we need to check.
Yeah, that was one of the things that they were unsure about and were looking for guidance. Christoph?
Is this something that we even want to get into? Like I understand from a very high level, like looking at the issue, wanting to know whether certain drivers and stuff can be deprecated. But I would question if this is a topic that as an open source project we ourselves want to get into, because there's just, as soon as you start opening up this can of worms, like the rabbit hole goes very deep when you start getting into like GDPR regulations and all of this kind of stuff around what you collect and where you store it and how long you retain it and all of that kind of stuff. In particular down at the tool level and that kind of stuff. Like if I was, and this may be something that we consider talking to the Minikube folks about, if this was something that we were talking about for like the Kubernetes core, like the way the Kubernetes core has kind of looked at stuff like this, as far as like what plugins and stuff do we support and maintain, it's like, okay, how we support in the central piece, the framework, and we make it extensible, and we've added in extension points that you can tie things into, and like maybe Minikube as a way of trying to make the code base more sustainable wants to look into for these drivers and stuff, spin them out, make them all pluggable, make them things that the community can support if they want them, if they need them, as opposed to trying to make all those decisions in the core as far as productizing Minikube into something like that. So like that'd be at least the question that I would just in general throw out there is like, is telemetry a thing that we want to even get into as an open source project? Is this something that we want to invest in, especially considering Minikube is saying like, we don't really want to invest in making a framework for telemetry collection and storage. We would just be a consumer of it. I don't know that there's necessarily enough demand across the project that's to say, yes, this is something that we should do, should get into, should invest into.
Can I make one comment and then you, Ben? We did actually have something for telemetry previously in the project. It was something that people would opt in to run. I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but it is in retired.
Yeah, was it retired or archived? Was it speculator or something? I recall which. Let me try to take it up.
Yeah, I just want to say that we have done telemetry previously.
Were we doing compliance assurances though, or is like the part of the rationale of having turned it down that we weren't?
We turned it down because no one actually ran the thing. Ben?
I just linked it, by the way.
Thank you.
And Tim Hockey would know more about that. I mean, so I having worked on a very similar tool, I don't think that we'll just make it pluggable drivers is a super great answer. That will be a lot of work and make it harder to maintain because like the interface, what you need across those things isn't necessarily stable. I do think though that if you look at the rest of cluster lifecycle, they've relied on polls, and that's one potential answer. But I have some sympathy for there are a number of reasons it would be really useful to let a component like this phone home. A common one I get when trying to fund work on like Kind is attempting to quantify how much usage it has, which is really hard when people are doing things like go get or homebrew or whatever. I don't have a good way to get an idea like how many users it actually has, and doing things like sending out a poll doesn't really give you that picture. So besides deprecation, like for a couple of these projects, I know right now they're going through staffing questions on the Google side for this project. Having metrics is one way that some other open source projects are able to like show their success. And we certainly wouldn't be the first open source project with something like this, but I also understand that like it's a whole can of worms. But as Bob pointed out, and as I point out, we have kind of stepped into this before, or we are to a certain degree collecting info today. For example, if you wanted to know at the core level, you could look at something like the image polls for the container images and see like which are most heavily used or something like that. And like that data is available and we have looked at it before. But we don't have this for some of the other projects.
I love the goal of getting data. I think if we're going to do this, it's best if we come up with something for a mechanism and obviously policy at a project level. Just as complicated.
But I think this is where the CNCF steps in quite a bit. Like they have their privacy policy and things. I think that they don't know is what are they. Privacy policy doesn't tell you things like how should you store it.
Yeah, the implementation specific, we wouldn't want to say like, yeah, anybody in the project who wants to do some telemetry, go for it. Just make sure that you adhere to this policy. Like we need a concrete implementation and we need a review that it meets the policy.
Like if the project or the sub-project owners aren't necessarily the stewards of the data, like if the CNCF LF is willing to be sort of that entity that holds it, and they have their privacy policy and everything there, I think there would be a bit more, trust in it. Especially if there was like a nice codified way of like requesting this in the future.
I think too, if the mechanism itself is open source, so there's two levels of trust, I guess. Like, do I trust that my information is going to be private, and then do I trust that it's going to be used responsibly? If the implementation is open source, people can review and understand. If there's clear documentation on where the data is held and stewarded, and if ultimately the output is a public anonymized and useful piece of data aggregation, I think that there are plenty of places in open source where this seems to be happening and people appreciate it. It's not just instantly like pitchforks and flames, like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. There's a huge benefit, especially for something our size and complexity, to being able to get this.
Or no?
I think there is. I don't want to say ultimate answer to this question. More like what exactly they're trying to collect. Because if they're basically trying to collect information about downloads, versioning and stuff like that, I think it's fine. But if we end up in the situation they basically try to collect personal information, it's a different conversation, because there's also the problem of GDPR in like European might want to request pulling out the data from that data set they're trying to build. So if they say, okay, no personal information, just information related to how user consume the project, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I don't think anyone here would be, even approach collecting like PII of that nature. But it's definitely like, it is worth stating that this is not something we're interested in collecting. Ben?
I mean, you still have to be careful, because for a platform like this to work to collect things like downloads, you're probably going to want to look at some kind of identifier just to deduplicate the data. So you do still need to consider all this. I think it's worth asking the Linux Foundation if they have any precedent. They have a lot of sub projects. Surely some other one has looked at this before, besides our own. I think that it's not reasonable to ask us to build a platform, but it is reasonable to ask us to outline some policy and to reach out about like if there is anything available for them to do this. If and when we have a better idea on these things, we also should probably be making sure they're more tightly applied to the registry. When we've raised this in the past, I pretty much just said, yeah, use the privacy policy. And I'm not actually sure that it fully meets some of the details outlined here. Their privacy policy, it's the policy to the user, but it doesn't cover things on the implementation end of like, how long should we retain data, or like, should we have a mechanism for purging, or there's some mentions of like, how Europe views US data collection. Like, do we have to make sure that European users have their data stored out of it? This is where I think probably actually instead like some off-the-shelf platform. Another thing that came to mind is I think Kubernetes does actually have some Google Analytics for like the website. And I think I've seen projects use, I think like Homebrew uses something like Google Analytics. So if there's something like that where we can deem that this is approved and just say, here's what you use and how you use it, that seems like a fair ask. But I feel like we should probably go ask the Linux Foundation, the CNCF, because we can't be the first. This can't be the first ask.
Yeah. I figured like, I think at this point, that is our next AI on this, is open up a service desk ticket with the LF. Both regarding, legal possibility, and if they have any sort of precedent / tooling or anything like that to that handles this already.
Yeah, and also to just clarify what we've been doing at the registry so far with the current work, we're just not doing any permanent storage. We have like ephemeral log storage, and you could pull PII from that. But I think at some point we'll want to do more permanent like analysis again, like I did previously, and I wouldn't know how to advise the group on doing that because I don't think we have strong enough policies outlined on the actually doing it side, as opposed to like, here's the contract we're trying to maintain. That's still too broad and vague, I think.
I think right now we leverage GCP privacy policy because we mainly use GCP services. I think that's the only thing that I would say shield us for some kind of policy around PII. But other than that, we have like nothing specific.
Right. So right now we can only use those logs for like debugging. We don't actually use them for analysis at the moment. And when we want to do something like that again in the future, I think we'll have to be careful of this kind of policy. And I'm sure the project's going to want to do that down the line.
So would anyone like to take point on opening the issue and the asking the LF about it?
Sure.
Okay. Ben, would you mind assigning the issue to yourself?
Yeah. Well, it's in the notes.
Thank you. Are there any?
Can I also, because Ben came out with the new registry, can I also talk to CNCF about this and make sure everything's covered for the registry? I can directly talk to them if that's okay.
Tim?
At the Linux Foundation Member Summit a couple of weeks ago, they were making a huge push on LFX, and I requested access since I'm on steering to the Kubernetes project instance within LFX, because they're basically pitching it as the tool for actually this type of stuff, but I don't know. Perhaps I understand they have some type of a backlog established of features. What was present for the project isn't anything we'd particularly use at the moment, but maybe this is something that we could feed there as a abstracted requirement. They have a huge platform of tooling that they're trying to integrate, and project telemetry data feels like it would be a useful part of that. And the LFX platform already has to deal with privacy and PII. It's a fascinating platform. I was surprised to see that my wife's name and phone number are stored, for example, and I know that I did not give them permission for that, but I understand how it ended up in the tool also. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments on this issue? Does anyone else have anything else they would like to talk about today? Okay, I think we can call it here then. Thank you, everyone. This is our last public one of the year, so I will see, well, all of you in Slack and see everyone the next call in 2023.
Take it easy, everyone. Happy holidays for those
Yep.
celebrating.
Enjoy. Later.